At this stage of our project, we're done with our existing ground surface creation. We went through and created a DAT file by extracting contour data from the DGN file. That DAT file, then in turn, we built a triangles file, or a TIN file, made some changes to that TIN file, and now we're ready to bring in that existing ground surface into our site project. That will form the basis for all our proposed grading work. At this point, we're going to start a proposed grading project through a program called Site Modeler. I'm going to go ahead and access PowerCivil, and I'm going to get into a new design file. This design file is located in the Chapter 3 folder. It's called siteplan2d.dgn, and it's our proposed kind of site layout. You can see here that our proposed project is going to be a building with a parking lot in front of it, a pond in front of that, and we've got a main road going through the site and an access road or entrance road into our building site. We're going to do the grading for that inside what we call a site project. To access the site project, or to create a new one, in our case, you can go through the Civil pull-down menu under Modeler. You can also access through the icon in our main site tools, PowerCivil Tools. It's the second one on the left-hand column. When you bring up the Modeler program, it enters into a project wizard where we either open an existing project or a previously created one, or we're going to create a new one. In our case, we'll create a new one. We're going to click the Next button and just kind of step through the wizard. We have a current working directory, and we're going to create a new project file in that directory called Site, Site1, Chapter 3, and siteplan2d.gsf or GEOPAK site file. I typically like to name the site file the same as my DGN. In this case, I'll just back out the 2D and call it siteplan.gsf. Click Next, and at this point, Modeler is open. We've got what we call the Active Site Object Control bar that pops up. We'll be using that throughout our project, and that's dockable. We can move it out of our way if we want. We're also still in the project wizard at this point, and we also have a new pull-down menu in MicroStation called Modeler, where all our tools, project tools, model tools, and so forth are located. We'll get to those in a moment. In the project wizard, since this is a brand new project, we want to go ahead and create a new model. Our model is going to be called Tower, which this is an office tower, so we're just saying that the proposed grading that we're going to create will be placed in a model called Tower. We also can set some project preferences if they're not previously set at this point, so we can kind of tangent off and take a look at the project preferences, or if we've gone through this tool before, those are probably set and we could just continue to hit Next. Let's take a look, since this is our first time, at the project preferences. Site preferences, or tolerances as we call them, can be set up and then again used over and over for every project. We have a Files button so you can load up or open up previously saved off preferences. So one might go through this one time for the company or organization and save it off, and then everybody else would access those preferences. I'll go ahead and open up one. We've got a folder under Site called Standards, and in there we've got a Site Preference file, SPF, for our modeler preferences. And those have stored off all the various options that you see in this options list. For example, our stroking, again in DTM tool we had a stroking, same stroking applies here. We're going to set a 10 and 0.01 for curve. We have corner stroking, so as we go around corners we can add more points to better define the corner. B-spline, plan and profile stroking for when we do profiles, and a maximum triangle length of 100. Our project components, we're associating our project with a particular DDB file. In our case, we've got a standard feature database that has symbologies set up on how to draw things, and that's called Site DDB. So when we need to draw curb and gutter, we'll grab the appropriate feature out of the DDB file to draw it, versus having to remember the level, weight, and color that curb and gutter go on. Our visualization, or how things are going to be viewed as we work through here, the contours and so forth, we're going to go ahead and set some of those up. We're going to go ahead and view the active object and the active model as we're working. So as we are displaying to you the contours of your project, you'll be looking at the overall model or tower, in our case contours, and you might be working on a particular component of that grading plan, like for example the pond, and you might want to see the pond as well in a different symbologies and a different contour interval. So we give you the ability to display both or two sets of contours just to kind of help you in your grading. And that's a choice. If you don't want to see both, you can turn one or the other off. Contour smoothing is available here. We're not going to set any at this point, but we can always come back and modify these preferences. As far as the model, how that's going to be displayed to us, we can set up some model visualization. I'll go ahead and click on the model visualization. And when we're viewing the model, we're going to be viewing the model in 25 and 5 interval for contours, and there'll be blue and white lines for the contours. We're not going to be showing you triangles. We're not going to be labeling the contours at this point, but we could if we wanted to. And again, we can come back and change these later. And again, to change any of these, you would just double click and set the appropriate symbology. Now, like I said, we have model visualization, and now we'll look at each individual object that we may create. So we have a very standard list of object types here, and a naming prefix for each of those types, and with each of those particular types of objects, they have not only how to display the contours and what interval to display the contours at, but it also has, what kind of slopes come off of that particular type of object. So for example, I've highlighted parking lot. Parking lot has 3-to-1 slopes coming off of that, tying down to ground or to something else in the model. Buildings will have the same. We can make changes to those. For example, I can go to the ground object, and those have no slopes. I can set the visualization, and I've set them to be the same as our model, 25 and 5 interval. If I want to change any particular object, I just highlight it. For example, I'll highlight building. I'll go to the default slopes for building, and I'll decide I want to change those default slopes to 6-to-1. I key in my change at the bottom, and then along the right hand side of the list I have an icon to modify that item. So I click modify. At this point it tells me that its object slopes have changed, and would I like to modify existing objects. I don't really have any existing objects yet, but I'll go ahead and say yes. And I can make changes to any one of those object types. Again, these would be standards that you would set up, and as you add objects to your model, you could change each object to have its own individual settings. The updating, you'll see things dynamically update, and that's because we have auto update model turned on, so that therefore as I put in a building, for example, and the slopes take over and it slopes 6-to-1 until it hits the ground, as I move that building around, we will modify or update the graphics and recalculate the slopes. All that automation is due to the fact that I have auto update model on. I also have element associations turned on, which we'll get into later, so that if an element is associated with something else, that it will automatically update. We have a clip model on working area boundary. When you're working in large project sites, you may want to restrict the automatic updating to a certain area. Therefore, you can toggle that option on, place a boundary, in a particular area of your site where you're working or grading at that point, and it'll only update the contours and so forth in that area, and it may save time down the line. As far as saving the project, we do not automatically save it on the fly. If you're used to MicroStation, when you add things, they're in the file. Here you're going to be working with it, and if you don't save it, then the changes aren't there. So we can set up an automatic save, and we can say, well, let's save that project as we make changes every 10, 5, 2 minutes. And we can create a backup of the project file as it is when we come into it for that particular session. And again, all these can be set up and then saved off as a standard preference file. So I'll click OK, and I'll exit out of the site project preferences. So I'm kind of now back again at my wizard, where I will step through and continue with the project wizard. I'll click Next. So now I'll have a model called Tower. You'll see up in my active site object control, there's a model now. It's empty, there's nothing in it, but it's called Tower. It tells me on the project wizard that I've created a new project. That's the GSF file, the project file, and I've created a new model called Tower. At this point, if I click OK, I'm out of the project wizard and ready to work. We also give you the option to open up another wizard. So if this is indeed the first time you've created a project, and it is indeed a brand new project, then you might want to bring in some data. We have that ground 10 we created. We want to bring the ground 10 surface in as the basis for our grading project. So I'm going to go ahead and open that wizard and step through that.